Welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining this interactive webinar. Again, how to improve team performance with courageous accountability and natural behavior. Our guests today are Ellis and Hugh Massey. And so for those folks who are joining us for the first time, I want to introduce Lee to you. He's a nationally recognized leadership coach, award-winning author, certified speaking professional, colonel in the Air Force, retired, and a former Vietnam POW. And Hugh Massey is a CEO, Global Human Performance Accelerator Behavioral Insights pioneer, entrepreneur, keynote speaker, mentor, and board member. These two gentlemen have dedicated most of their career and life to helping people understand natural behavior and how natural behavior affects your work and life every single day, and how it can be used in a positive way to improve personal performance and team dynamics. So welcome, gentlemen. So glad to have you with us, and we are ready to get started. And so let's go ahead and get going with the first question. We had talked about this specifically offline, and so let's have a conversation online, specifically on which are the strengths and struggles of various behavior styles and factors that impact working remotely, specifically as it relates to DNA behavior. And Hugh, go ahead and kick us off on that question.
Yeah, Kevin, I'll get started with this. I think a good place for me to start is, for the last 10 weeks, since March the 9th, I've been in introvert's paradise, working at home. So when you're introverted or what we would call reserved in the leadership behavior DNA assessment, and you're also more independent in nature, this is actually quite easy to do. Particularly if you don't also have to travel. I've had last few years a pretty brutal travel schedule, and then driving around Atlanta. So this is like heaven. But breaking the question down, working remotely is easier for people. Firstly, and Kevin, maybe if we pop up the graph, for those people that are more what we would call independent in nature. So on this graph in the top right, we have take charge there, and the person's name's Tammy Miller, who's pretty strong on take charge. Now, broken down underneath the take charge factor, we have some sub-factors, and one of those is independence. And it's likely with that score there that Tammy would be quite independent. So she would be able to work independently. That's just something that she's capable of doing. Whereas quite a lot of the team on the left-hand side, the cooperative ones, would be more group orientated. So they want to do their work, their projects in groups. They want to talk to people, share ideas, feel the energy of others while they're getting their work done, be able to touch base regularly. When you're working at home and you're separated from your team, that's much harder for those who are cooperative. And they will feel at times lost and floundering. Whereas it will generally be easy for Tammy. She will just run off and do what needs to get done more easily. So just from a working perspective, the take charge person who's independent is going to find it easier. The cooperative people will find the working remotely harder. And that's where the leader needs to step in and ensure that the cooperative people are on task, they're not overwhelmed by the situation, that there's regular engagement. And in our team at DNA Behavior, we use technology tools like Microsoft Teams to help with this. We have daily huddles, we have plenty of Zoom interactions. So we are constantly checking in on everybody, and in particular, we watch those that are more cooperative, to ensure that they're not getting lost or feeling that they're getting lost, because you don't want anyone spiraling down. Now, the second one that I think is important is right below it, is the outgoing reserve. So I mentioned that for me, I'm in the introvert's paradise right now because I'm an extremely reserved individual, extremely introverted. I like my own space. I don't need a lot of daily personal contact. I can survive without that for quite a long time. whereas the outgoing people need a lot of regular contact. They need to sort of, in a way, feel the love. They need to feel the personal connection more. So do the patient people. They need to also feel what's going on as well. And if you're isolated, that gets a lot harder for the outgoing people. And that's why now the restrictions lifting, they're looking a little bit more to jump outside and go and do things and see other people and sneak out to a party or even, to the office. But again, from a leadership perspective, you need to ensure that you're keeping the outgoing people engaged and connected with the team. Again, online tools can help right now. Phone calls help, but they're going to need, at any time, they're going to need more love and connection, even when you're in person. But when you're not in person, they're going to need even more. On the flip side as well, it's important to ensure that the reserve people just don't get lost out there and they're left alone, beavering away by themselves. You can't let them withdraw too much. And if you're a leader like me who is more reserved, you need to step it up and ensure that you are engaging the team, or that you've got a leader working with you on the team. Like I've got Leon Morales on our team, who's very good at engaging everybody on our team. He's watching everybody daily. That helps me because I am more reserved. So you've got to have a tactic to deal with that. But they would be the main points. I think people who are spontaneous are very good at adapting to different situations, and we are definitely in a different situation. A very spontaneous person can turn on a dime. But the other side is that they could be, some of them could be chaotic on organization, and again, need to be watched in that area to ensure that they are, delivering what they need to deliver on time. And, Lee's going to talk a bit more about accountability. So I will leave it there. Is there anything you want to add to that, Lee?
Yeah, you're right on the toes of it right there. And that is that if you think about people who self-manage well and people who don't self-manage so well, and the reality is that some people manage themselves and their work by themselves so much better than others. And if you look at the reserve people and the planned people, statistically, they kind of go together, but planned people especially will self-manage to get their projects done on time without a lot of interaction with other people. Whereas the outgoing people, they are not the best self-managers, and so they will get involved in a lot of different projects, and they will start to slip on the one that you may be depending on them for. And so the point of that is that you cannot expect that an outgoing person is going to self-manage and get their project done without interaction with you. If you give them an assignment and you step back, let's say you are more reserved and planned, and you just step back and think they'll do it like you do, it will not happen. You will be disappointed. You must interact with that person. I would say at least having weekly huddle call with them to see how they're hitting their milestones. And so make sure you have milestones with them, because if you don't, they will get distracted, get into other projects, and away it'll happen. It just, the day before, they'll be calling everybody, hey, can you help me get this done? and it's just, you just have to take that into consideration when you're managing people in the office, but even especially more so now that we're more isolated. The distractions will be out there even more. So remember about people who naturally self-manage and people who don't. You just have to manage them differently. You can't say, well, if they're a good person, if they're a good worker, they would do it. Well, I'm just telling you, if you really want them to be successful, and this goes to accountability, as a leader, your responsibility is to help people be successful. So part of your accountability as a leader is to help by managing them differently. And this is showing you in a very graphic way here that there's a bunch of people on this team that are not going to be good self-managers. And the leader of this team is going to have to interact with them regularly to keep them on task and make sure they're progressing.
Yeah, I think that just to back up what Lee said is and this is why we're showing the graphs in this webinar today, is this information is highly predictive. And so over a period of time, it will play out to be true and regularly true. It's more predictive when people are under pressure, And absolutely right now, in the times we're in, people are under more pressure. The leaders are under more pressure. Everybody under the team is more pressure. These behaviors are going to come out. And this gives you a very early read on who you've got to pay more attention to on your team in these special circumstances. When times are different and everybody's out there being social, in a way, you've got to pay more attention to the reserve people to ensure that they're stepping up and out and not just hiding away there. So we want to emphasize is, and why we spent so much time on the natural behavior and the way we measure it at DNA behavior, is because it is so predictive, and it gives you as the leader that roadmap for managing your team, and knowing that who you've got to go and talk to. It's not just a matter of seeing the data here. It's then as the leader reacting, taking that information and going and asking warm questions and drawing the team in and asking how they're going, checking in on their family, diving in a little bit. What projects are you struggling with? Just get a little bit deeper on the questions is also important, not in a threatening way, in a very warm, engaging way. And that's what we're really encouraging. I know in a lot of work that Lee's done with leadership, we talk about leaders, and he talks about leaders engaging with their teams more, not withdrawing. In this time, it's even more important.
Yeah, and Hugh, the main thing, I think also, this helps you to see how to be intentional for each person.
Yeah.
And because of that predictive nature. And there's nothing better than for a leader to be intentional about planning how they're going to go execute that interaction with that person and to help people be successful. It's really all about helping people be successful. That's why the leader plays such a big role in this courageous accountability, is that you've clarified and you've connected with people in the way that works for them. Which leads me, I want to go ahead and mention now that one of the free offerings we have today at the end of this webinar is a download of how to manage these different traits. And it's something that's a very powerful tool, because it shows you how to relate to each one and how to manage them. It shows them their strengths and their struggles. But I think you could take that almost a cookie cutter approach until you get started, and then you'll probably want to go back to it.
Yeah, I think that Lee, that I think it's great that we're doing that, and on the cover of the book we talk about managing differences, and I know we had big debates about that when we were writing the book and distilling it all down as to what's important here. And the really hard thing for a leader to do is to manage the differences. And you use the word intentional. This graph gives you start of a roadmap to manage each person uniquely, to provide that customized experience. That's really what we're seeking to do. And the tool that we're providing afterwards then gives you the guidelines for managing each person uniquely, to manage the differences. Because this is if you can manage the differences as a leader, you'll get past the communication blockages that come up, the talent misalignments. You'll keep people motivated, which is very important. And they're really, if not done properly, they're the roadblocks for a leader. They're the cause of every business problem. They'll be the cause of bad numbers, if you want to call it that. And so, I think Lee's used the word intentionality. That then leads to a customized experience for every person on your team, and that's the goal.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, great answer, gentlemen. And I just want to remind the audience as well that we're going to have some Q&A time at the very end. If they'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A button on your toolbar and just submit a question. We'll answer that at the end of today's virtual event. Let's start with a poll question. Specifically related to this question, I'm going to have a question come up, and if you'll just share your answer. To what degree do you consider the natural talents of others when you're managing people in a remote or virtual environment? Just be honest. Go ahead and click and submit your vote. And to what degree do you consider today the natural talents of other people? I know we have many fans and clients on this event today, so many of them are already using these tools that we offer. But to what degree do you consider natural talents of others? Excellent. Thank you for submitting your vote. Yep. So I'm going to end that always, sometimes, and rarely. I think that's very fair, and I think it's honest, an honest answer that we all have room for improvement.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, that's what I was about to use, is honest. I'm glad that we got that response. I think that is about right. I think the goal for us is to get more of the sometimes up to the always, get that number higher. But I think this is a pretty realistic scoring or evaluation, if you want to call it that, even for people that have been trained in this.
I agree. Let's move on to question 2. We had talked about, Lee and I in particular were talking about that we're seeing less and less accountability in our general culture. I think we're all feeling that to some degree. And so how does DNA behavior impact our tendency to hold people accountable, and especially to do it in a positive way? Because accountability can have a negative connotation. So how do we do it in a positive way? And how is DNA behavior part of that?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit earlier. I started to touch on it because for me, I think the leader has to own the whole process of accountability. And to do that, you have to realize that you're leading people and not managing computer machines or technology. And people have certain characteristics. They have emotions, they have moods, they have different personalities, different DNA. And so unless you are able to take that into consideration, that intentionality we've been talking about, then you really don't have the full scale of accountability because you're not relating to them in the most effective way. So when I think about, our courageous accountability model, we talk about clarify. Once a decision is made, then you clarify. And that's so important. Hugh's used that word a couple of times already. It's so important that people get on the same page, that what you, the leader, expecting is they know what to expect too. And some people will make assumptions. I was operating with one of my grandchildren the other day, and I thought I was being pretty clear, but later I realized that there was some stuff I was saying that he was missing, and he was not going to get the results that I was expecting. So I had to back up and own some accountability for that. It's the same way in every situation. So then once we've clarified, we're going to connect with them based on who they are and what their traits are. And we've talked about that. Some people require more management, more interaction, really, more social interaction than others. Some require less. Some want graphics, some want conceptual. I'm a person, I have to have the big concept first. I can't get into the details. My brain just won't go there if I don't have a framework, a visual or a big picture framework to hang the details on. I won't be able to absorb the details because I don't know how they fit together. So understanding how to communicate and relate and connect with people there, then connecting with the heart is where we value and encouraging people, and then collaborating. And this whole idea of collaborating really requires an understanding of the person. We're going to talk a little bit about trust a little bit later, but if you don't understand what a person's natural trust is, you really won't know how to collaborate with them. Some of the things that Hugh's going to talk about there too. But being able to connect and collaborate with people is very independently dictated by the individual you're dealing with and what's their natural behavior. My wife and I are 2 standard deviations apart on almost every factor. I've said that before, but it keeps coming back up every day. We've been married almost 46 years. We have a great marriage, but it's still an issue to deal with because she sees the world very differently than I do. Her responses are very different from mine. And so that accountability requires me to value her strengths and not get hung up in the way she's different. It's her struggles, what we would call her struggles. And so all of that kind of fits together so that it's a team effort. And as a leader, I'm playing my role in being responsible for moving everybody toward success so that we can be accountable for success and reap the benefits and celebrate. And when that doesn't happen, then I hold them accountable for not accomplishing the assignment they were committed to do. And I know that they were committed because we had clarity on the beginning, and I've collaborated with them, and somehow they dropped the ball. So then we can talk about that and have that confrontation. So that's kind of a big picture of the way I see accountability.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lee. I think you used an important word. I think clarity. If there's clarity of the goal and of the actions, that's important. And the other word I think is constant engagement. Which we talked about, at the start of the call, just for managing a team remotely. But I think it doesn't matter whether it's remote or not, or good times or bad times. Having the constant engagement, I think one of the problems for accountability is that, a goal's laid out and then the leader just goes away and forgets about it for a while and then steps back in later on to try and check it, or doesn't even check it. That's even worse, and then gets upset when it's not being achieved. Whereas if you can have process, I believe that, accountability can be good for everybody. It can be friendly. It can be inclusionary. There can be participation if you have the right processes that come with it. One of the things that we do at DNA Behavior is we follow the traction process and do a level 10 meeting every Friday. And we go through what our rocks are. We go through an action register. Everybody knows it's going to happen. Everything's laid out there. It's then friendly. It's not confrontational. It's the, in a way, it's the step in well down the track to chastise somebody because something hasn't been done or achieved, then causes it to be nasty, or the leader then gets nervous, or should I do it or not do it? Whereas if it's constant engagement, I think it's easier. I think the other thing for me is I'm learning is that I'm quite, and this, Lee, I'm quite fast-paced and more objective and rational. So how I ask the questions could also be important in that, to keep it relational, you've got to lighten up a little bit on the questions, but you've also got to dig in. Part of the accountability is to ask questions too. So I think that's important. But just the one thing I was going to say is I've been following a series called The $1 Trillion Coach recently. There's this guy, Bill Campbell, who used to be the coach to Steve Jobs at Apple and Google and various other companies. And he really played the role of a team coach, and he was, there with everybody, coaching the whole team, not just an individual. So it wasn't just about the leader, it was about the whole team. But the point's very clearly made. To be a great leader, it's not just about being visionary. I think a lot of people think, I'm going to be a leader and I'm just going to be visionary. You've also got to be a good coach of the leader and the team, but you also need to be a good manager in the sense that you can hold the one-on-one conversations. That was a point I really learned, that in a way you can't step up and be a leader unless you can do the one-on-one conversations and communicate and relate to the people in your team properly.
Yeah, because success is built around performance, but it's also built around behavior. Yeah. And how a person, and to some degree, attitude is going to be very important. Morale, energy, all those things come into play. And as a leader, you really need to have, have your hand on the pulse, so to speak. You really need to know what people's attitude is, what's their morale, what's their energy. And you're going to have to manage that too, because if you are helping that stay up, we call that a people culture in the book. If you're really helping that stay up, the people are going to do the work, and you're not going to go out and do all that work. They're going to do the work. And this is, it's like the idea of the conductor of the orchestra. The leader is the person, so that the drummer is doing get the right beat, and the person playing the violin comes in at the right time. All of that is what they're doing, but they're doing that well because the attitude, the energy is positive. They're using their best talents. When you put them in a place that they're not using their best talents, and sometimes we all have to go into places where we're not using our best talents. We have to work through that. But there you're going to expect that it's going to be more stressful. Their performance will be slower and probably not as strong as it would be if they were in their best natural talents, but you need them operating there, and you may be surprised they may come through even better than you expect. So all of those are kind of pieces that the leader can be aware of when they're understanding and thinking about managing differences.
Yeah, I think if you can, it's about empowering the team. As a leader, you want to empower the team to do what they're great at, and they will shine, continue to shine, and you'll shine. And that, I think that's the thing. But they also need to know that you're around. I think that just to be the absentee landlord is also not a good thing. So they need to know where you fit into the process, where you're going to step in. Doesn't need to be all over the top of everything, but there needs to be that right balance. And that's also important. I think some leaders I watch a lot of entrepreneurial leaders get into trouble with that. They're control freaks at the early stages of the growth of the business, all over everything. Then they try and step away. They're, off on the golf course, not checking anything, and then wonder why it all goes to, to nothing. And I think there's a balance there in that. And that's true for any team at whatever level the business is at.
Yeah. Speaking of entrepreneurs, at every level of the business, as a business grows, you're going to need different kinds of people. And the leader, starting out, the leader's doing most everything. If you're an entrepreneur, quite often you're wearing many hats. And as you grow, you're going to have to systematize more and give up some of those hats here and there. And that's quite often a very difficult thing for entrepreneurs to do. But those who recognize that and say, okay, this is the part of the business I'm going to work in, you take care of that and lead that, they can be very successful. So the famous book by the great coach, I'm forgetting his name right now, but What Got You Here Won't Get You There, makes that point really well, that we all have to continue to grow as we go to the next level. We have to develop new skills and take on new perspectives that fit the level that we're at.
Yeah, I think that, this triggered a thought for me, Lee, but something that, I've been learning more and more of is, as a leader, you've got to be prepared to take responsibility, and you are going to take responsibility for things at the end of the day you don't know about, because you cannot possibly know everything that's going on down to the last degree. Yeah. And that is why the accountability is so important. Because at the end of the day, you've got to have the leaders below you taking responsibility too, and holding their teams accountable and being prepared to be held accountable. It's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. And I want to we haven't used the word courage yet today, but when you think about accountability in today's culture, the real issue is courage. And every leader has to come face to face with their own doubts and fears. Because if you don't confront your doubts and fears, figure out the courageous right thing to do and move forward with it, you're going to fail. You're going to do things that you would never think you would do. You're going to fail in carrying through your responsibilities. You get afraid of what people are going to think. You're afraid of your image. You're afraid of power, losing power. You get afraid of all these kind of things, and it takes you out from doing your responsibility and doing what's right. And we see that in spades every day in our culture, where leaders are so afraid that somebody's going to judge them this way or that way if they don't do it just the way that it looks good over here. And what we end up with is people who are good people, but all of a sudden they're really failing us in carrying through with their responsibility. And that's where we need every American citizen, every citizen around the world, really, to take ownership for doing the right thing, and that takes courage.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of courage to live who you are, and that starts off with knowing it. I think the more that you know who you are, and that's something that we are very strong about with DNA behavior as a leader. You've got to know who you are. You've got to love yourself. You've got to be totally aware of your strengths and your struggles, confident. Internally, we'll be talking about trust in a minute, but I think they're foundational. And once you've got that right, you can step up and have the courage, one, to do what's right, but also the courage to be who you are and to act confidently. And the reality is, we've all got a set of strengths and struggles. We're not going to be perfect at everything across the board in leadership, and what everything is, of all of what is required. And that's where you need to be able to have the courage to choose somebody, maybe to be your partner in the leadership phase, whether that's a coach or a COO or a company president, to work with you on those things as well. But I think also part of the courage is just knowing the right thing to do at the right time. But if you don't know yourself as the leader and not confident in yourself, you're probably going to struggle with that a lot more.
Right. You know, I've coached a lot of leaders, and I have a lot of stories. I may have told this one before, but I don't think I've told it recently. I'll keep it short. So I'm coaching this guy, the CEO of a company in Atlanta. It's a nationally known brand, not a huge company, but a nationally known brand. And he's a really good guy, a very solid person, strong faith, just a good person of good character. But he had no connection with any of his senior executives that worked for him. And so I got into that. I met with them also and found out that he never spent any time with them. He did not know if they were anything about their families. He didn't know anything about their background. And so I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, that's just not my thing. I just focus on the mission, the results, and da, da, da. And I said, well, I don't think that works real well. I've been doing this for a while, and, leadership is about both mission and people. So I kind of convinced him to try it. So because he's highly results oriented, we made up a spreadsheet, and we put all his people's names across the top, and the things that he could get to know about them down to one side. And his job was to take them to lunch and get to know something about their family, go by their office and visit for 5 minutes and find out how things are going. And, okay, well, how was your weekend or something, those kind of things. And he had to check them off. So, it was a scary feeling for him to do that, and it just wasn't something he knew how, but he knows how to check things off of a spreadsheet, and he started doing it, and it totally changed his relationship with his people, and it totally changed their respect for them. And what it really did is it started to build a lot of trust on the team once he did that. So one of the things, the highly results-oriented people, they quite often have to learn to feel by acting their way into a new way of feeling. He had the right intellectual character perspectives on people, but he wasn't able to show it because it was kind of scary for him. It wasn't natural for him. So he learned to operate out of his natural behavior by just checking it off and doing it, and it really paid a great reward.
Yeah, I think this is an important point about natural behavior, Lee, isn't it? That, you can have the values to value people, respect people, want to engage with them. That can be your value. That can be your heart.
Exactly.
It can be your belief. That can be very ingrained. That can come from your family, community life, going to church, sporting teams, whatever. But you've still got this natural hardwired behavioral style that masks the heart, and it makes it hard to show it. And at the end of the day, it's, what shows out, though, in the way you act is what people think.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's important, at the end of the day, to be able to, to know that, if you're someone like me who is one of these people, that you by knowing it is the first thing and accepting, okay, that is there, but I've got to work on stepping out to show what the real truth is and what the real Hugh is, and that's the same, I think, for many leaders. Yeah. And it's easy to get stuck within yourself, and not do it. That's why I've been taking, leadership positions in, like entrepreneurs organization, so that I make sure I step out and I have to do these things. Otherwise it wouldn't be as much,
Yeah. That's called another way. We talked, I think, last time about adapting. Maybe I talked about it on another webinar recently, but, leaders who learn to adapt to respond with the most appropriate behavior or action at that moment, they're just going to be more successful. That adaptation and this human behavior helps you understand how to do that.
Yeah, it gives you the starting place gives you a fighting chance.
Yeah,
So, all right.
That's a great nuance of understanding and using natural behavior for sure. By the way, the book author for What Got You Here Won't Get You There was Marshall Goldsmith, for the audience, if they want to make a note of that.
Thank you.
This is a good segue to our next poll question as well. Our next poll question is really asking the question, do you find it easier, this is a reality check for all of us, do you find it easier or more challenging to hold people accountable? So go ahead and click your vote, hit your anonymous vote here, and you can choose your answer on where you are right now regarding holding people accountable based on your natural behavior, understanding who you are. Votes are coming in.
We're getting more honesty, which is good too, I think. Increasing levels of honesty.
Good. Thank you for your votes. Yeah, keep those coming in. We have a pretty healthy crowd, pretty healthy audience. I want to share these results. Yes, and sometimes. So that's excellent. Very encouraging for our audience that they understand the issue of accountability and that they, for the most part, are doing it sometimes or all the time. All right, very good. The next question is relating, we've alluded to this, but the next question is regarding factor 5 on one of the factors in DNA behavior is trust. And it's one of the factors for cohesion, obviously, that's predicted in the assessments that we use every day. So how does natural DNA behavior affect our ability to trust others? Or how does that really play out? Hugh, if you'll address that question first, and I'll go ahead and pull up the slide.
This is a very pinpointed question and really gets to the heart of leadership. And it's why, Lee and I, when we were building the DNA behavior assessment, wanted to have trust in there because, historically, when we'd been working with our prior system, we didn't have it there, but we knew who trusted and didn't trust, but we wanted to get it much more front and center because this is so important to everything. Just to tell a story, one of the early assignments I had in Australia before I permanently came to America was I worked with a very large consulting house, one of the big branded consulting houses, and had their leadership team in the room, and 22 out of the 25 leaders showed up as low on trust. And I could see immediately that's why they had and that's why we were called in. They had a problem with retention. They were great. Everybody wanted to come and work for this firm, had a good brand name. But after a year or two, everybody went for the door because the people culture was bad. They were great at getting new clients, but absolutely hopeless at retaining the client and getting, follow-on work, which is not a good thing for a consulting house. So really, in a way, it was a shambles. And when you look at it, and you've got 21 out of the 25 leaders of that firm, the senior consultants out of a 750 sort of size firm at the time, it's bad. And what's going on? And when you break trust down here, we've got the trust factor there, and on the left-hand side is more the skeptical. So we're talking on the skeptical side, the people that are lower. The people that don't trust as much tend to be, and we've got these measured out in what we call sub-factors, tend to be more controlling, suspicious of what others are doing, fearful, questioning, so they could rip people apart on questions, and it can be very exacting on the details. It's not feeling that warm and friendly or relational, is it? When you think about that, and so if all of those factors or sub-factors come walking out every day and to the team, that's a problem. And if people are feeling that all the time. Now, is skepticism important? Yes, it is. To be discerning and analysis, to check things out, but in the right dose. So I think that's something that's important here. We don't want to rubbish people. I'm one of these ones on skeptical. So, we're not going to sit here and rubbish people that are skeptical. But it does need to be managed, because if it's not well managed and you demonstrate the behaviors that I just sort of mentioned, there will be no relationships inside the team, and it won't be a very cohesive experience, and you'll have a lot of problems managing the team. But this all starts, and I think this is one of the things that Lee taught me, was this all starts with you. So if you as a person are lower on trust or more skeptical, you will have trouble building relationships because you'll be skeptical of others. You will not demonstrate trust to others because you're demonstrating fear, you're trying to be controlling, you're over-exacting, you're asking questions that rip them apart. Therefore, they're not going to trust you, and it becomes a very vicious cycle. And so if you think about that, when you've got a business with 21 leaders that are low on trust, imagine what's happening every day. That's a nightmare. So, you know, I think that's the perspective that's needed here. So at the end of the day, in teams and in organizations, we want to build a high degree of trust inside the organization. It will generally be that in many cases, the leaders are on the skeptical side. You know, where your Tavis is here and where Fred is, that often will be the leaders. In this team, your Tavis is skeptical. He's going to have to be aware of the impact of his behavior and his skeptical nature on the rest of the team here that's quite trusting. His behavior could rip that apart fairly quickly. So, you know, that's fairly important to understand. And that's where, again, the system helps you see that. And when businesses are having trouble, it's often because the skeptical side of the equation is getting ahead of itself and not being reined in enough. Now, you need, you know, again, you know, Lee and I talk about balance between results and relationships. You need a balance with this, because if you're just trusting and you accept everything that's brought to you and it's too easy and soft, that's a problem too in accountability and getting a result. You know, at the end of the day, we want both sides, you know, working in an equilibrium of results and relationships, or of trust and skeptical. So, you know, I think that's, you know, the framework we look at this, and you can see it's quite deep, but it's very important that you understand where you are at on this. And if you are a skeptical leader, is not to embrace being skeptical. Again, that is important to recognize the strength of that, but also recognize the impact of it if not well managed. Mm-hmm. So, Lee, I'll hand it over to you to mop up here.
Well, since Hugh brought it up, he is highly skeptical. I'm kind of more in about the mid-range, just slightly on the skeptical side. But there's a part of me that is trusting at times. And some of the times I've made my biggest mistakes when I was too trusting. And so I wanted to mention that people, there's a lot of folks there, they're scoring, you know, 56 to 69 there on the trusting side. And they're going to they're going to do some good things in that they're going to be believing in people and trusting people, which is a good thing. We want to do that. But they will also likely be taken advantage of and not be able to confront people nearly as easily. And so they will procrastinate on confronting. And that can really be a problem with accountability when they are not saying, okay, here's what you said you would do, here's what we're expecting, it didn't happen. But also even along the way, checking in and saying, how's it going? And well, I thought you said you're going to be here by, you know, this week. But that over trusting is certainly a problem that we run into. And when leaders do that, the team is watching and they're seeing that you're not holding people accountable, and it undermines their trust in you as a leader. It undermines their morale that people are not being held accountable. So leaders, if you're a trusting leader, great. You have some great assets there. But if you don't become skeptical and hold people accountable at the right times, then you're going to undermine your leadership, undermine your teamwork, and undermine ultimately the performance success of the organization. So it always comes back to, we all have to, whether you're on the left side or the right side, you have to be aware of what your strengths are, but also what your struggles are. In any area of struggles, you have to make a determination and a commitment to adapt. Nobody else is going to make you, or it's all up to you. You have to decide to adapt in that situation and get uncomfortable. And that's where it always comes back to courage, the courage to soften up or the courage to toughen up. And leaders that can adapt like that, we all love them because we see that they really do care about people and they're encouraging and supporting, but they're also holding people accountable and being tough when they have to. And that is so attractive, and it really makes for a very successful team.
Yeah, I think that you know, you used the words I was going to you know, just use here to wrap up, Lee. But I think that, just to recap here, the trusting people at times do need to toughen up, and I think that's very important. And you come across to the skeptical people at times are going to need to lighten it up or soften it up a little bit. You know, Yatavis's success in managing this team is going to, you know, there's nothing wrong with him being skeptical, but he will need to lighten up and make how he holds people accountable just that much more friendly. In his approach, his demeanor, and just recognizing that the people across here, the team members across here, have feelings. And you know, one of the things I've always brought up with people is how you ask questions is very important. And you can be very cutting with people in how you ask questions, very accusatory. People can feel shredded. And that's where a lot of trust gets lost. But questions are important to be asked. And if you ask them the right way to get a positive outcome, and you keep it warm and friendly and engaging all the time, then you won't have these problems. And I think that's the important thing, is to remember, which is what we talked about at the start, is a leader, particularly, to keep the environment engaging the whole time, and then some of these problems won't come up as much, around trust.
Yep. And one last thought on that is that trusting people generally will take things a little more personally. When just the skeptical person being themselves and asking hard questions, sometimes the trusting people, especially the outgoing ones, which most of these tend to be outgoing, they will take it personally. And that's one of their struggles. If you tend to be more trusting or a person who takes things personally, you need to deal with that too, because quite often that doesn't work out in the best way for you when you take things too personally.
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, and that leads to our next poll question too. And we're asking this is another reality check on whether you've had the opportunity to take a DNA behavior assessment or not. What do you feel is your gut, your natural bent when it comes to the trust factor that we've just talked about? And so I'm going to go ahead and launch this polling. So what is your natural bent when it comes to the trust factor? Go ahead and submit your vote and be honest about your anonymous answer. Are you more skeptical or more trusting? Do you feel like it's some of both? See these questions coming in. That's excellent. Yep. So when sharing these results, it's a good even mix, more skeptical or more trusting, or some of both. So it's an interesting audience. So thank you for sharing that.
Honest audience.
Yeah, that's right. We appreciate the honesty too. That's important in leadership too, isn't it? Good, excellent. So what we're talking about, we have a final question, and it's really talking about the issue of accountability and trust. But in order to achieve a healthy accountability, it also requires collaboration between leaders and the team. So let's take it through the lens of our virtual environment now. For those, especially those who are working virtually, how does that really play out for collaboration regarding that? Either one of you can start.
I'll let Hugh go first.
Yeah, I think, I'm learning collaboration is absolutely important, and it's one of those words that I think has got to go along with character and clarity and confidence, which are some of the big words that Lee uses. But I think this is the one of the other C's that sits there in the family of key leadership attributes. Are you prepared to be collaborative? A man is not an island. A man can't do everything by themselves. And it's absolutely important that the leader is very close to the team. Problems are solved together. I think, some crowdsourcing of how problems are solved, I think is important. So long as a decision is reached, that's important, to allow people to express their views, get the data in, allow people to express their views, and then and that's collaborating, getting the inputs, and then then a decision gets made. And I think that the more that the leader steps back to work with the team. I'm more of an independent person. I tend to do thinking by myself, again, because I'm reserved, come up with an idea, but I also know that if I'm going to be successful, I've got to get the buy-in of my team. I can't just railroad something through. We've got to work together to ensure that it all works. Lee's taught me a lot about collaborations, again as well, in getting input and other thinking, and that's what leaders have got to do. Of course, there's an extreme of going too far with that, but because nothing might happen. But I think that collaboration is so important, and again, it comes down to there's some courage in there to do it, and it might even mean at times the leader's got to admit that they're wrong, or their idea is not the biggest or best one in the room. It's allowing the team members to shine with it. Again, that's all part of the trust that we've been talking about. If that gets built up, it's easier to have more and more collaboration and good things happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end it, Hugh, because if you really want to have the best success and the best performance, then in today's world, you really need input from a lot of people, because there's a lot of people with different experiences, with a lot of knowledge. We live in a knowledge age, a technology age, and there's no leader that understands all that and knows all that. Now, the leader may have to make the decision ultimately, but getting that good alignment and discussions where people can have free discussions and hearing all the different points and perspectives is so powerful for really having great accountability and great success. So when leaders understand who they are, know their strengths and struggles, understand their people, and take all that into account, it just really, it raises them a level up, I think, in performance.
Yeah, and I think to do it well, there's got to be good communication in the team. You've got to understand people's communication styles. You've got to know how to bring a group of people along so that they're getting buy-in to the ideas, and step by step, just landing a proposal on someone's desk and saying, we want you to accept this in the next 24 hours. That doesn't work either. I think, there's got to be constant communication, understanding people have got different learning styles. I think you touched on that earlier, Lee. Some people want to hear the big idea first and then see the details later. Others are more engineers and want to get into the weeds straight away. Others are more conceptual, want to see a graphic, visualize it. Some need to feel it a little bit. You've got to bring everybody along on the journey, and I don't think you can do that if you're not collaborative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Excellent. Yeah. I wanted to mention our free offer that we have today. We alluded to that earlier, but I want to make sure that you have a copy of it. And then we have a question we have a couple of questions that have come in as well. This is the free offer for today. It's the Relationship Essentials Summary. Again, a very valuable download that's available at leadershipbehaviordna.com/downloads. And it takes through 8 factors, each trait on these 8 factors: ideal work environments, how to connect with a particular trait, how to manage this particular trait. A great handout to have, and it goes in sync with the book that we're also that Lee and Hugh also published that came out this year, called Leadership Behavior DNA. And you can go buy that book, leadershipbehaviordna.com/book, or your favorite online retailer. So those are the offers that we're mentioning today. And we have about 5 minutes, and there was one question that came in, gentlemen, related to say the members of the team understand what we're talking about today, but their leader doesn't. How do those team members really, how do they survive? How do they interact? How do they get results and rely on mission and people while their leader hasn't quite gotten to that point yet? So how can you help that person?
I think the most important thing it's very important to learn how to lead up. And that's what we're talking about here, is leading up. You're leading your leader. And how do you get that kind of influence? Well, you have to deliver the goods on your responsibility at work. And once you do that, you start to build some relationship capital, some professional capital with your leader. And then you have to assess to what degree is this person secure enough to hear a new idea that might actually help them. And so once you've made that decision, you kind of have to look at risk versus reward. An insecure leader may not want to hear it and may be offended by it. But a secure leader, you could say something along the lines of, you know, have you ever thought about that what works for this person may not work for that person? Or I've just read this good book, you know, about leadership behavior DNA, discovering natural talents and managing differences, and share something from that, or, you know, something that you could give them to look at or show them would bring this awareness to their mind that there is a way to actually manage people differently. And there's a real payoff for those that do.
Yeah, I would agree with that, that 100%, Lee. I think, you know, what I would add to it is that if you're the person there feeling that you're not understood in the team, or that the leader is not bothering to understand you and the rest of the team, the first thing is don't get emotional with that leader. You know, don't go there and fly off the handle at them, you know, because that isn't going to get a response. I think the calmer you can be, the more measured you can be in your approach. You know, and what Lee was saying is being very practical. In the moment, in the right moment, go to that person and share your experience of an interaction you had with them recently, and explain to them why it was energy draining for you, and why you didn't feel connected with, and this is what you need. And show them and say, this is, you know, and bring some empathy or understanding, and show them that you know, this is where I saw you coming from, but this is me, and that's a problem. And I think we need to be able to do this better in the team, and then see how the person reacts. You're putting it back to them then to respond to that. And they might do it. It might fall apart again. You know, I think you've got to provide a few chances, and maybe that'll embolden somebody else in the team to step up as well. I think, you know, it does need the team to step up and demand it. I know one day when I was doing a team facilitation, the team leader brought me in, and, you know, I had a good relationship with her, and we, you know, thought we understood what the team dynamics were. Had the team around the table, and suddenly two of the team members just said straight out to her, we don't trust you because you do A, B, C, D. Now that was a fairly confronting thing to do, but, you know, at the end of the day, once they got past that, everything worked a whole lot better in that company. She took it on board, the leader took it on board, even though she was frustrated and a bit upset. When they got it out and explained why, and we used the tools, because the tools that we're talking about here and that we've been showing you today are a great level setting. They help put it out on the table where everybody is equal and enable it to be explained. And then if you use practical real life situations where things actually happened, and don't get too emotional about it, then this sort of confronting, if you want to call it that, can work. You know, so that's, you know, and that's part of what, you know, Patrick Lencioni calls creative conflict as well, is enabling a little bit of that to happen. And it's got to come from both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just, you know, one opportunity that's there would be to get the download that we were talking about today, and just go sit down with them and say, here's a tool that you could see how you can see the advantage of managing this person this way and this person that way, and show them that visually. And also in the book, that graphic that you saw of that team is actually in the book. They're available. It may be in the download section too. I can't recall, but you can check there.
The tools keep it from being too emotional, I think, and,
yes.
and keep the conversation even, because you've got to be even in your energy when you go and have that conversation.
Right.
And the tools in a way provide a buffer to do it.
Yep. Good point.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you again for your time today. Thank you, audience, for being with us. We appreciate you sharing your time with us today. We hope it was helpful. You'll get a free recording webinar replay of today's event in your inbox. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for attending. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.